reload, fire, and reload. All right, so the Germans are pushed back. The Germans occupy the high ground, establish good defensive positions, and everybody begins to dig in. One thing that they both try to do is to flank the other one. They're both moving north, and one of the first battles is the Battle of Ypres. The Germans try to break through to the Channel port. The Allies hold with 50,000 British, 50,000 French, and 150,000 casualties. Now, the British had landed with an expeditionary, the whole British Army, incidentally, in 1914, regular army is 250,000 men, of which they have about 150,000 in England. The rest is stationed in the colonies. But British land about 100,000 men on the continent, but the losses are so severe that by December 1914, those guys are essentially dead. The British mobilize a territorial army for replacement, but the British don't have a draft. It's not until 1915, 1916 that they institute a draft. So the British don't have a very big army. This is one of the reasons why the Kaiser was dismissive of the British. He said if the British declare war, we'll send some policemen up to northern France to arrest them. And it was pointed out that the British had dreadnoughts, and the Kaiser said, well, dreadnoughts don't have wheels. Bad mistake. All right, so 1914, October, the first Battle of Ypres. November, Turkey joins the Central Powers. Why does Turkey join the Central Powers? Because Turkey is at odds with Russia, and Russia has been seizing Turkish land along the in the Balkans and along their common border, and Turkey wants that land back. Also, the Turks are irritated at the British. The Turks have paid the British to build 2 new dreadnoughts for them, and those dreadnoughts are actually finished by July 1914. They've been bought and paid for. The Turks have sailors in England ready to take control of those ships, and as war starts looming, the first Sea Lord, man by the name of Winston Churchill, decides that we're not going to give these ships to the Turks. We're going to seize them and put them in the British fleet for better use in the British fleet. So they seize the ships. The Turks are outraged over this. Now Churchill says, don't worry about it. We'll pay so much rent for these ships every day, and after the end of the war, we'll give them back to you. So the Turks are absolutely outraged. Now, the Germans have a dreadnought and a battle cruiser in the, actually it was a battle cruiser and a light cruiser in the Mediterranean, the Goeben and the Breslau. And they're being chased all over the Mediterranean by the British fleet, but they manage to elude the British fleet, and they get to Constantinople, Istanbul. And when they get to Istanbul, they are immediately sold to the Turks, and they become part of the Turkish Navy. Of course, the sailors are still German, and the sailors just simply change uniforms and put a fez on their hats. So this really irritates the British. Essentially, Turkey has an alliance with Germany, but it's not until November that becomes obvious, and war is declared between Turkey and Russia, and then Turkey, France, and Great Britain. All right. From November 1914 to the spring of 1917, you have stalemate. Now, the slide says over 500,000 men are killed on the Western Front. That figure is actually inaccurate. It's probably closer to 2 million men on the Western Front. This is the flower of European manhood. The lines will change little, less than 10 miles in either direction. What they did is they dug in a series of trenches, not just one trench, but a front trench, a second trench, a reserve trench, a supply trench. Sometimes they dug in 5 separate trenches covering maybe 3 or 4 miles. In front of each trench they had barbed wire, and very difficult to penetrate. You could charge. The whole area was covered with machine guns, it was covered with rifles, it was covered with heavy artillery. Most of the casualties in the war incidentally are going to come from heavy artillery. The amount of shells they fired was absolutely mind-boggling. At the Battle of the Somme, for example, the British will fire 1 million shells at the Germans over a period of 1 week before they will assault the German lines. They were so confident in the ability of these shells to destroy the German lines. When the British went over the top, they were told, you don't even need rifles, you'll just walk over with all the Germans will be dead. Well, the shells might have driven the Germans crazy, but they weren't dead. As soon as the shelling stopped, the Germans came out of the trenches, the British went up and started marching toward the German lines. Most of them didn't get more than 100 or 200 yards out of their own trenches before they were killed. The British will lose 20,000 dead on the first day of the Somme in June of 1914. But this trench system is virtually impossible. If you assault the trenches, you're going to get a lot of men killed. That's just the way it is. You cannot break the trenches. Now, they tried a lot of different ways to do it. They tried the flanking operation. That didn't work. They tried personal armor, like the medieval knights. They tried different machinery, but nothing seemed to work. It's only in 1916 that they come up with something called the land tank. This is Churchill's opinion, Churchill's idea. In other words, let's have an armored machine with guns. It's totally armored. And this is going to evolve into the tank. And by 1917, the British will be using tanks. And the tank and the airplane will become breakthrough weapons. Not so much in the First World War, but in the next World War. But, the lines virtually do not change. The trenches are 10 to 12 feet deep, probably 10 to 12 feet wide, and virtually impenetrable. Incidentally, the Germans built the first trenches, the best trenches. If you've ever seen the movie Paths of Glory, you'll see a fine example of trench, what a real World War I trench was like. Those trenches, the film was done in Germany, and those trenches were built by the same German engineers who built the trenches in 1914 and 1915. Now this trench looks very nice, but mostly the trenches were soggy, they're wet, they had mud in them, they had rats in them, they had lice in them. It wasn't very nice living in a trench. And you've all heard the term trench foot? That comes from this period of time. Imagine getting in these trenches and having your feet wet for 2 or 3 weeks and cold. Okay. All right. Now the Germans are very inventive. In 1915, they had a fine chemical industry, and they introduced gas. The first gas was chlorine gas. They used this on the Eastern Front at first, and they killed thousands of Russians. The Russians don't know what it is. The Russians make a report to the British and French. The British and French don't believe it. They use it in the West in April and May of 1915, the Second Battle of Ypres. Now, they use the gas. The problem with gas is you fire the gas off and you can't control which way it's going to go. It could blow back on you.
Depends on how the wind is.
But when they use the gas, they're not really prepared to take advantage of it. A wide line opens up in the British and the French lines there, but the Germans don't have the reserves and don't take advantage of it. Before they realize the importance of gas, the British and the French have gas masks, and they've also developed their own gas. The Germans will come up with different types of gas too. Chlorine was the first one they used. All right. Now, how are you going to break the stalemate? Well, Winston Churchill, first Sea Lord of the Admiralty, this is a man with, how shall I say, a fertile mind. He says, we're going to flank them. We're going to flank them by seizing the straits, seizing Constantinople. We're going to seize this area. Now, in order to seize Constantinople, you have to seize this area, the Dardanelles Straits. So an amphibious expedition is mounted. First they send the Navy in, British and French pre-dreadnoughts and ships in to see if they can shell the Turkish forts and force a passage to Constantinople. I say Constantinople, it's really Istanbul. These ships go in and they hit mines, and the British lose 2 pre-dreadnought battleships, the French lose 1. That doesn't work. So then they send the army, and the army consists mainly of Australian and New Zealand troops. They land the army at a place called Gallipoli along the shore. Not a good place to land an army. The beach is only 50 yards or so wide. Then you have bluffs. You have to climb. At the top of the bluffs are the Turks. So they land the army in February of 1915. They get about 200,000 men ashore. What do the British and the Australians and New Zealanders do when they get ashore? Well, they congratulate themselves. They sit down, they fire up their cooking materials, and they brew up a cup of tea. What are the Turks doing? The Turks are up top running away because they don't have any ammunition, so they take off. On their run to the rear, they come across a Turkish colonel by the name of Mustafa Kemal. Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey, turns these guys around and says, you can't run away, the enemy's over there. And they say, look, we don't have any ammunition. Kemal says, I don't care if you don't have any ammunition. You have bayonets? Yes, fix your bayonets and charge. He says, I don't order you to fight, I order you to die. So the Turks go back and they hold the British and the French, and then we have for 8 or 9 months stalemate in the in this area. Thousands are going to die. The British will launch repeated attacks on the Turkish positions, and they will fail. This event is known as Anzac Day in Australia and New Zealand. I think said a lot to, and contributed a lot to the eventual decision by Australia and New Zealand to become fully independent states. The soldiers who participated in that had a very high opinion of the British military before. They didn't have a high opinion of the British military afterwards. So this was a disaster. And Churchill bore the blame of it. And eventually he's going to have to resign his position. All right, now the naval warfare. The Kaiser built up the second best navy in the world. Kaiser has about 14 dreadnoughts, about 6 battle cruisers. The problem was the British had 26 dreadnoughts and about 10 battle cruisers. Now, it's one thing to have the second best navy in the world, except when you go to war against somebody that has the first best navy in the world. So the German Navy is going to spend 4 years essentially locked up in port. Going to come out a few times, but mainly at the Battle of Jutland in May 1916. But basically the German Navy is not going to contribute anything to the war. But Germany does have a war-winning weapon. This is a new device called the submarine. How do you use a submarine? They're working it out. You use it to sink commercial shipping, such as the Lusitania, and also to sink a warship if you can get your eyes on a warship. And the Germans will sink British warships during this period of time. The problem is, according to international law, before you sink, if you're a man of war, before you sink a commercial ship, you have to give the ship fair warning, you have to let people get off the ship, and you have to make a provision for the ship. Now, if you're a dreadnought, you can do that. That's no problem. But if you're a submarine and you surface, what's going to happen? Well, the commercial ship may have a 3 or 4 inch gun to open up fire on you, or it will try to run you down. And this happens to a number of German submarines. And the German submarines just attack first and ask questions later, and people die. And when the Lusitania goes down in May 1915, over 100 Americans died. Now, the Americans were warned not to sail on the Lusitania. There were ads in the newspaper to sail on the Lusitania anyway. Woodrow Wilson and the American people were outraged, and Wilson forces the Germans to scale back on their submarine attacks. Now, it's a violation of international law. But then again, England has imposed a blockade on Germany, which is a violation of international law because it's blockading not only munitions, it's blockading food to Germany, and that was not supposed to happen. And also England limits imports to Denmark, to the Netherlands, to Sweden, to Norway. This was an absolute violation of international law. The Germans will protest, and so Wilson will write a series of strong notes to the French and the British, but they don't listen to them at all. May of 1915, Italy comes into the war. Why? Italy wants the Dalmatian coast of Austria-Hungary. Very unfortunate choice. The Italians will lose almost 1 million men in the war. What will they gain? Virtually nothing. Okay. 1915, 1916, Turkey orders the expulsion of the Armenians from Turkish lands in Anatolia. And just south of the Black Sea, they are expelled to the Middle East, to modern Syria. It's estimated the 1.5 million died out of the 2 million living in their empire, although the numbers are not certain. Is this genocide? The Armenians say yes. Many others say yes. The Turks say no. It's interesting, much of the horror of the Armenian exodus and genocide is documented by a German doctor by the name of Alfred Wegener. The Germans were not supposed to report on what was happening to the Armenians, but Wegener did. Wegener took photographs and he rode back to Germany and told everyone about this tragedy that was happening. So if you look at photographs of the Armenians during this period of time, mostly they were taken by a German doctor. After the war, Wegener goes back to Germany, and when Lord Hitler comes into power and he introduces his legislation against Germany's Jews, Wegener writes Hitler and says, look, be careful, look what happened to the Armenians. I mean, we don't want anything like this to happen to the Jews. This is leading to genocide. And Hitler doesn't respond to Wegener, but apparently he made a comment to his staff saying, this man's a fool, who remembers the Armenians? Okay, so genocide, poison gas. The great battle, some would say the worst battle, comes here at Verdun. 1916, the war is a stalemate. Falkenhayn, who's head of the German army, knows that he cannot continue. He's got to win the war. So he attacks at a place called Verdun, where there's a salient in the army, in the line, into German territory. Now the purpose of the attack is not to take Verdun, it's to draw the French in and to bleed the French army white. Falkenhayn wants to kill 5 French soldiers for every German soldier killed. Now the crown of the Kaiser's family, the Hohenzollern family, is losing prestige during this period of time. So the Kaiser insists he put his son in charge, the Crown Prince of Prussia. Okay, Crown Prince of Prussia is in charge, but either Falkenhayn didn't explain the war plan to him, or the Crown Prince went off on his own. The Crown Prince charges into Verdun, and he practically takes Verdun. And this is celebrated throughout Germany. And this means that the Germans are in Verdun, they're stuck, and the French come into Verdun. So rather than having the French come in and the Germans just simply blast them apart with their artillery, they're both in Verdun. This battle will last from February 1916 till about November 1916. We'll have 800,000 casualties and not accomplish anything. When the French sent their troops into Verdun, the division stayed there only 2 weeks or 3 weeks at the most. Then they left. So by the November of 1916, almost every unit of the French army had served in Verdun. Okay, the great naval battle of the wars on May 31st, the Battle of Jutland. This is forced by von Falkenhayn. Von Falkenhayn says, what's the use of these ships? We're not using them in any way against the British. So the German fleet comes out. The aim of the German fleet under their Admiral Hipper and Reinhard Scheer was to trap part of the British fleet. In other words, we're going to chop up the British fleet and even up the odds. Well, the German battlecruiser squadron comes out, the British battlecruiser squadron under Beatty comes out, and they meet each other and they exchange fire. Hipper is going to retire. He wants to draw the British battlecruisers into an area where the German dreadnoughts are. During that exchange of fire, 2 or 3 British battlecruisers just blow up, and Beatty is said to have remarked, there's something wrong with our bloody ships today. Now, the man who commands the British fleet is a man by the name of Jellicoe. Jellicoe has a unique responsibility, as Churchill said. He's the only man who can lose the war in the afternoon. He has to keep naval supremacy. So he gets criticized for not being more aggressive, but he does exactly what he needs to do. He preserves the integrity of the fleet. Jutland is really a tactical victory for the Germans. They sink more ships than they lose, but it's a strategic victory for the British, because the British maintain the blockade. The German fleet won't come out again. At the end of the war, they try to come out, but there's a mutiny. They don't come out. All right, 1916, the French asked the British to take the offensive north of Verdun in a place called Somme. And Douglas Haig, who was commander of the army, is willing to do this. His troops are eager. They're not well trained, but they've got a lot of artillery. They fire 1 million shells. Incidentally, of the 1 million shells they fire, probably 10% were duds. They just landed there, didn't go off. So French farmers and Belgian farmers today, as they plow up the land, they're raising a crop of about 100 tons of shells every year. Now, when you find those shells, you don't pick them up as a souvenir and take them home and put them on the mantelpiece. What you do is you call in the army guys and they collect them because they're very dangerous. The Battle of the Somme, British and French offensive, 420,000 British casualties, 195,000 French casualties, 650,000 German casualties. Look at these numbers. These numbers are absolutely incredible. And remember, what is this war about? So Austria wants to teach Serbia a lesson. All right, 1917. Ludendorff, who was now in charge, says, you know, we've got to end this war. We've got to pull out all weapons. So he pushes the Kaiser and the Navy into, you know, beginning unrestricted submarine warfare. This is going to bring the United States in the war. Ludendorff is not worried about it because he thinks the war is going to be won before the United States can bring its force to bear. And Russia is beginning to crumble. All right, to make sure that the United States really comes into the war, the German foreign minister sends a telegram to the German legation in Mexico, of which the British pick it up and the British translated, essentially offering Mexico an alliance with Germany, and after the end of the war, Mexico will get back Arizona and New Mexico.